righty, let's go ahead and bring in our special guest. His name is Brian Berletic. He is a former U.S. Marine. He specializes in Eurasia, and he is based in Bangkok. Welcome back, Brian.
Thank you so much for having me back. And I actually got up early so that I could watch the whole show, and I've been enjoying it.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you. Because I know it's, for those who don't know, it's really early where Brian is located.
Yes. And I'm not a morning person.
In Bangkok. Okay, so Brian, I definitely want to get into this war with Israel and Iran. It's really crazy to me, and I think a lot of people have been asking the question, where does China and Russia stand now that Israel and Iran have been, going back and forth? And Iran has not been, in my opinion, based on the videos that I have seen, they have been dropping some pretty big blows on Tel Aviv. What are people saying in Asia? Like, what is the community? How do they feel about this particular conflict?
Well, it's hard for me to speak for Asia. I'm here located in Thailand. I can tell you that there is a westernized media space and also a very distinctly Thai media space, even both being Thai language. And of course, the westernized media space is just repeating whatever the West is reporting. But the Thai media space is very suspicious of especially U.S. involvement in all of this. They understand that it is the U.S. behind this, that they have created this problem in the Middle East. This is a means of further isolating both Russia and China. And obviously, if any kind of war is brought here to Asia, the lives of people, their peace, their prosperity, their stability will all be upended. Just as the U.S. has upended peace, stability, and prosperity all across the Middle East, all across the continent of Africa, all across Europe now with their proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, and Latin America for a generation plus. So this is a real growing concern.
Yeah. Speaking of growing concern, I don't know if you saw this, Brian, but you guys have got to get a load of this one. Here they go with the propaganda. Speaking of Western media, this was Fox News. Everyone check this out. This is hilarious.
Exclusive satellite images revealing the location of a previously unknown Iranian nuclear site. Now, the facility spans nearly 2,500 acres, and this is a big discovery. Jillian Turner has more from the State Department. Good morning, Jillian.
Pretty explosive, Dana. These satellite images that we have obtained exclusively show the alleged site location and even the layout of the secret, previously unknown nuclear weapons facilities inside Iran. This, of course, raises fresh concerns about the regime's role in these ongoing nuclear talks with the Trump administration. The National Council of Resistance of Iran has collected intelligence from sources on the ground inside Iran that locate this nuclear weapons facility in what is called Semnan province, far from the regime's already known nuclear sites. It's codenamed the Rainbow Site by Iran's officials, and it spans nearly 2,500 acres. It's been operating, as far as we can discern.
So luckily, Brian, a number of people online have been laughing at that news clip and making fun of it, because it takes us back to the war with Iraq, right? Like they said, we have these secret nuclear sites of Iran that we just happened to find. What is your perspective about that?
Well, the organization that they cited is actually the Mujahideen al-Khaliq, which for the longest time was a U.S. State Department listed terrorist organization. And they only recently took it off the list specifically so they could use it to destabilize, attack and destabilize Iran. Nothing that they produce is of any credibility at all. It is an absolute joke. The organization itself is, admittedly, if you go to the Senate hearings where they were talking about this, they say how difficult it would be to sell this organization, wider support for this organization, because it's a cult. They're abusive. They have killed Americans in the past. And yet these are the people they're not only using as proxies against Iran, but this is who the source of this information actually is. And then when they talk about satellite images, this is a photograph taken from outer space. If that's the closest you can get to showing us evidence of anything, then you don't actually have evidence. And of course, you bring up the most important point of all. The US has lied repeatedly, deliberately to predicate their wars of aggression all across the region to Iran's east and west. They invaded Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. They destroyed Libya in North Africa. They've done this over and over and over again. We're supposed to believe this is the first time they're telling the truth. Also, you just mentioned earlier on the show about President Trump being asked about his director of national intelligence saying there are no nuclear weapons in Iran. He said, "I don't care what she said." And that's a brief moment of honesty, because that is the reality. They don't care what the truth is. They want this war. They have been preparing for it for the entire 21st century. You just think about step by step by step how they moved the military into the region, isolated Iran from its allies, destabilized the whole region, and shaped everything for this very moment. We remember the U.S. finally toppling the Syrian government late last year. And the first thing the U.S. and Israel did was wipe out all of Syria's integrated air defense systems. And this was to clear a corridor to carry out these specific attacks. So this was all planned. They're going to do this no matter what, regardless of whatever evidence they have. And of course, they're going to fabricate it, hoping that there's enough weak-minded people out there willing to buy it once again.
And another thing I want to mention as well is I don't really think that I don't think the US government really cares about the Israeli people. I really don't. I think this is about the resources that are in that particular region, that they wanted to have a hold on that, because we can't forget what Joe Biden said years ago. He said, if there wasn't an Israel, we would have created one. So that goes to tell you this has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. This has nothing to do with Israeli people. This is about the resources, particularly in that region. And I think one of the questions that I've had is, if this continues to escalate, like Donald Trump sounds insane right now, telling people, yeah, we got to go full speed ahead. They need to surrender, etc. If this was to accelerate to the point where American troops would get involved, I think the U.S. has already sent at least one Navy ship. If they were to get involved and we're now at war, America is at war with Iran. We are living in a multipolar world now. It seems like things are a little bit different compared to the war in Iraq and especially Vietnam. What is stopping Russia or China from helping Iran?
Well, you brought up many good points here. And I want to address the propaganda the U.S. is using to try to justify this war, and also justify Israel's attack on Iran, again, enabled from A to Z by the United States. It would not have been possible without the U.S. aiding and abetting the attack. It was essentially a U.S. attack through Israel. And I'm glad you brought this up. It has nothing to do with the U.S. having any concern at all for Israel. Israel is a proxy of the United States, and they are fighting this war against Iran through Israel in the exact manner they're using Ukraine to fight a war against Russia. And they don't care about what happens to Ukraine. And they obviously don't care what happens to Israel. Israel is now being bombarded by ballistic missiles. People are being injured. People are dying. Infrastructure is being disrupted. The economy is being threatened. And this was all brought upon by the people living there in Israel for a threat that does not exist. Iran does not pose a threat to Israel. And they constantly, and I've seen Israeli officials do this too, bring up the Holocaust as if this is radical Islam versus Jews, which is ludicrous. I was just reading, and they know people aren't going to see this, even though they themselves publish this. The Jerusalem Post published an article this week about the large Jewish community in Iran. The largest population of Jews in the Middle East outside of Israel is actually located in Iran. And the Iranian Jews oppose Israel's strike on Iran, and they support Iran's defense of itself against this aggression. I highly suggest people go look at that. And then the article also talks about how Jews have been in Iran for 1,000 years plus, and how they're very well integrated into Iranian society. The Iranian government itself goes out of its way to protect them and ensure they have representation in the government, even though it's just, the number is in the thousands. It's not a huge population, but they still give them representation in the government. So how does that reality exist side by side with this claim that Iran wants to wipe out all people just because they're Jewish. No, this is about the US destroying the region for the last 25 years and Iran wanting to defend itself, and Iran also not allowing itself to be subordinated by the United States. Now, you bring up Russia and China, I think also Pakistan and many other nations. They understand the implications of Iran falling. They are allies with Iran. They do considerable business together. There's also growing military cooperation between these nations and Iran. The problem is all of this takes a very long time to build up, and especially the military cooperation is relatively recent. Although you could argue the ballistic missiles Iran is using, these are based on designs from North Korea, Soviet-era ballistic missiles, so that there already has been a lot of help. The problem is, and I think people overestimate how much Russia or China could do at this moment. What do people? A lot of people imagine, why doesn't China just send troops and planes and go help fight this war? And it just isn't possible. It's logistically impossible. People take for granted America's ability to project military power around the globe, but they have established that ability over the course of a century, building bases everywhere, logistical hubs, a huge navy, sea lift, airlift capabilities that China just, they don't have. It doesn't exist in China's military because they're not trying to threaten the world or project military power around it. But if I had to guess what they could do, what kind of support they could send, there probably are ballistic missiles or components they could send to Iran to replenish any stockpiles that end up targeted by Israeli or U.S. strikes, or the loss of launchers. I think they are capable of replacing at least some of these and allowing Iran to continue raising the cost of this U.S.-Israeli aggression against them, hopefully to the point where the U.S. and Israel back down.
Do you think that China and, well, I know Russia's, fighting with Ukraine, but do you think that China and Russia could do a little bit more, though? I saw there was a statement from China on social media where they said they did not agree with Israel, attacking Iran and starting all this off. But I think that, especially after us seeing the genocide in Gaza, I think we're past the point of statements. I really do. And that's what I'm wondering. Like, do you think that there's something else that China or Russia could do a little bit more?
Maybe they can help in terms of intelligence. Maybe they can help in terms of, I think one of the most important ways, that especially China can help, is economically. This is how they are helping Russia. This is how they have been helping Iran. They're buying most of their oil exports because the U.S. has placed sanctions on oil exports. China went out of their way to ignore those sanctions, ignore the threats of ignoring those sanctions, and that provides considerable funding for Iran, its government, and its infrastructure, the ability to take care of the civilian population, and also to protect the civilian population. But the problem is, I really don't know what else they could do besides possibly sending ballistic missiles or components, something to that of that nature. Maybe drones or communication equipment, things that are easy to train on quickly. There's always a lead time. Any aid you send, there's going to be a lead time. And this is something that I've talked about with the US aiding Ukraine, sending F-16s. These are planes Ukrainians have never operated before. It could take years and years for them to learn how to do it effectively enough to create some sort of difference on or above the battlefield. And the same will apply to any aid China sends to Iran that is advanced capabilities. We have to remember, China has a huge and growing problem within its own borders. Taiwan is an island province of China, recognized as such under international law, recognized as such by the US State Department itself. And yet there are US troops stationed on Taiwan inside Chinese territory. And there are tens of thousands of US troops and growing all along China's shores in places like the Philippines, South Korea, Japan. There are missiles pointed at China that can hit major Chinese cities. So this is what they're preparing for, because they know that they're next. And I think if there was more, or if there are additional things they can do, they will do it. I'm not so sure they will do it openly. But there are things they are certainly doing already, and if there is more they can do, they will do it.
Right. I thank you for reminding people about that, is that these countries also do have those military bases, U.S. military bases, like surrounding them as well. There's the issue also with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is getting a lot of criticism from his base, particularly in the past couple of days because of the war with Iran. I want to take everybody back to a segment. This was 2015. I just want to remind everybody what Donald Trump was saying back then.
Obviously, the war in Iraq was a big, fat mistake, all right? Obviously, it was a mistake. So George Bush made a mistake. We can make mistakes, but that one was a beauty. We should have never been in Iraq. We have destabilized the Middle East. But I want to tell you, they lied. Okay. They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none. There were no weapons of mass destruction.
All right.
And now you see, Brian, I have to point it out. I just feel like it's the same thing that's happening now, not weapons of mass destruction, but Iran is building a nuclear weapon, which we've heard for years. And it's like, what happened to that person? Like that was Donald Trump in 2015, right? But now he's become the George Bush. Like now he's W.
Absolutely, and this proves that he knows exactly what he's doing, and that all of his lies and his aiding and abetting, or at least presiding over this, I don't think he's actually making any decisions at all. I don't think U.S. presidents make any decisions. I don't think anyone is convinced that President Biden was making any decisions during his administration. So, but the point is, he knows what he's doing. He knows right from wrong. He knows this is a lie, and yet he's telling the American people otherwise. He is helping sell this lie to the American people. That is his job as president of the United States. That's what his administration does. These policies have already been set down in policy papers. I constantly refer to, and I think you showed this on the program when I joined you last time, Which Path to Persia from the Brookings Institution from 2009. People should look that up. It's on their official website. You can download it for free and read it. And they talked about how they'll use negotiations to pretend the U.S. wants diplomacy with Iran and then have Israel attack. So it looks like the U.S. had nothing to do with it, and then reluctantly join in with Israel afterwards. They have literally said that in the policy paper. They also talked about how Israel's probably not going to be able to destroy Iran's nuclear program or topple the government on their own, so the U.S. will have to intervene. So the U.S. intervening was already predetermined. This is already happening. They're just creating a narrative that makes this look like it's all just a coincidence. This is all the U.S. just dealing with it as it happens rather than planned all along. And I have to remind people, yes, it is about oil, energy in Iran. It's about controlling energy across the region. But also this is about eliminating Iran, controlling the Middle East so that the U.S. can further isolate and contain Russia and China. And I also mentioned this the last time I was on. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth back in February talked about how Europe needs to take over the U.S. proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, because the U.S. needs to pivot to China. And I think we may even have talked about how the U.S. would most likely want to eliminate Iran first, or at least seriously destabilize it before completing that pivot to China. And then just last month, Secretary Hegseth was in Singapore at the Shangri-La Dialogue, which is actually has nothing to do with Asia. It's a London-based think tank that organizes it. And he was talking all about how for a generation, the U.S. has been distracted in regime change and nation building everywhere else. Now we're going to focus on Asia. And if you really think about what he's saying, he's saying he's going to take all of that death and destruction and bring it to Asia. And that is what they're preparing to do. And that is what they're building up the military here to do. And you can see how they're creating narratives to not just lie about the Iranians or the Russians, but also the Chinese, poison people against them, really tap into that very still strong racism all across the West, and the sense of superiority that many in the West still have. Tap into that, and that fear that they have watching China, especially a non-white nation, surpassing not just the U.S. but the collective West. So that this is where this is all heading, unfortunately. we can protest, we can deny our money, time, attention, energy to the corporations that are ultimately underwriting and also benefiting from these policies. But this is going to happen, and we're not going to vote our way out of this. Democrat, Republican. Does anyone think Kamala Harris was going to do any? Actually, you were just showing clips of Kamala Harris saying like it's the same exact thing. And I remember people saying, when President Trump was picking neocon warmongers to fill his cabinet up with, again, just like he did the first time he was in office, people said, well, at least it's not Kamala Harris, because we would have all of these wars, maybe even nuclear war. And now there's serious talk about Israel dropping nuclear weapons on Iran. So it's completely insane how they trick people over and over and over again with the same exact trick. And they just never see through it. Although I do think a lot of people are waking up. And I don't understand why anyone would fall for Trump again. But if people are saying this isn't what I voted for and they're speaking up, that is good. I'm glad that people are doing that.
I agree with you. And I'm curious, like militarily, like if the US went to war with Iran, to be honest with you, I don't think we stand a chance against Iran. I know the US we have powerful weapons in the US, but I just don't see how because I feel like a war with Iran is not just with Iran. I'm thinking about Ansar Allah. I'm thinking about all of don't forget, like you mentioned Pakistan. Like I just don't see a prediction where the United States comes out on top of this war. I just don't.
It's really hard to say. I mean, even the more limited conflict between U.S.-backed Israel and Iran, we really don't know. It's very early in the fighting. Iran was launching these salvos against Israeli targets, and then the number of missiles started to kind of get smaller and smaller, and then there was a long pause, and then last night there was another relatively large strike, which is why I didn't sleep last night, because I was trying to track it. But there's many reasons why maybe it looks like Iran is running out of missiles when they really aren't, or they could be running out of missiles and their air defense systems are operating, but at what capacity? Nobody at this point knows. It's too early to tell. And so the Americans are looking at this, and they're using Israel to absorb the vast majority of Iran's military capabilities, to absorb it and to try to strike at it and destroy it before the U.S. intervenes. And then the goal, I don't think, really is to win the war. They just want to burn everything down. And they're very good at doing that. We've seen them do it to the whole rest of the region, which if Iran was trying to get nuclear weapons, that's probably the reason why they didn't want to be next. And by the way, there are other policy papers, one from the Rand Corporation, which is a very prominent U.S. Think tank, dangerous but not omnipotent, and it's from 2009, and it talks all about how even if Iran had nuclear weapons, they would only ever use it as a deterrent, and everything that they're doing in the region is to defend themselves from becoming the next victim on America's list of toppled nations. They admit this. And so there is always this very frank honesty in their policy papers, because they're so confident American people are not going to read them. It is on their website. It's free to download. I just downloaded it this morning to open it up and look at it, and it's on their official website. So that is the reality. There is no nuclear threat, even if Iran had nuclear weapons, even if anything Fox News just said was true. They're not going to use these nuclear weapons to just unilaterally start striking people, especially not Israel or the United States, because both of them have nuclear weapons to strike back with.
Right.
It was always, and look, they had the ballistic missiles all of this time. They could have struck Israel at any time of their choosing. They only struck when Israel struck first. So I think people should really take that into consideration.
This is incredibly true. And of course, a lot of us are pointing fingers back at Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been spreading a lot of propaganda because, of course, Iran did fire back. This is really insane. The statement that Benjamin Netanyahu makes here. Now he's trying to accuse Iran of trying to assassinate Donald Trump. Like the Trump assassination attempts that happened when he was running for president. He's saying that was Iran. This is absolutely insane. Everyone listen.
I want to talk about the nuclear threat, and I want to talk about President Trump. You just said Iran tried to assassinate President Trump twice. Do you have intel that the assassination attempts on President Trump were directly from Iran?
Through proxies, yes. Through their intel, yes. They want to kill him. Look, he's enemy number one. He's a decisive leader. He never took the path that others took to try to bargain with him in a way that is weak, giving them basically a pathway to enrich uranium, which means a pathway to the bomb, padding it with billions and billions of dollars. He took up this fake agreement and basically tore it up. He killed Qasem Soleimani. He made it very clear, including now, you cannot have a nuclear weapon, which means you cannot enrich. He's been very forceful. So for them, he's enemy number one.
Yeah.
Look, they also tried to kill me, but I'm his junior partner.
When did
they
you
understand that?
So, Brian, this is incredibly dangerous, like rhetoric. He has no proof of this. But here he is on Fox News. Yeah, telling people, go ahead.
No, okay, yes, because they never show any evidence. And one thing that they like to do is use Mujahideen al-Khaliq because they are from Iran. The U.S. and Israeli intelligence use them to carry out false flags because people will see, Iranians did this or that. They're members of Mujahideen al-Khaliq, so they are actually enemies of the Iranian state. But they know nobody's going to understand that. They'll just hear, Iranian government did it. If any of that was even true to begin with. And the thing is, Iran, who thinks Iran is going to assassinate the U.S. president, before any hostilities have begun, open hostilities have begun, knowing that would exactly precipitate the war they're trying to avoid. They were negotiating, even though they knew it was pointless. A lot of people said, why was Iran negotiating with the U.S. in the first place? They already negotiated with the U.S. A nuclear deal, and then they unilaterally withdrew from it with no evidence at all. And now they're negotiating again with the very guy who unilaterally left the first deal. And again, in the policy paper, they say, we are going to propose this deal. We have no intention of honoring it, and we will use its failure as a pretext to proceed to war. They knew this, but they went and they negotiated anyway because they are buying time, because they want as much time as possible before they know inevitable war is coming. But they are trying to avoid that war for as long as possible. So why would they assassinate the U.S. president? And also the U.S. president is in charge of nothing. He's making no decisions. This policy was written down over a decade ago. And it has been implemented ever since, regardless of who has been in office. So you assassinate a puppet, you create a pretext for the Western world to wage war against you. That person you assassinated isn't even in charge of anything. So what have you achieved? So what about any of this narrative actually adds up? And it doesn't. It's just more of the same thing the collective West and its proxies have done. Create pretexts to wage wars of aggression.
Just more and more propaganda to get people to try to go along with it. I thought about the war in Iraq with, the conversation around WMDs, like weapons of mass destruction. That was how they were able to convince, Americans to be on board for the war with Iraq. If you tell people that this person has weapons of mass destruction, then they're afraid, oh no, they might use those weapons against us to get people to favor the war in Iraq. Then later on, admitted that it was a lie, right? That he didn't have these weapons of mass destruction. Now it's, Iran is building a nuclear weapon, and Netanyahu going to such extremes to say that they tried to assassinate Donald Trump with presenting no evidence. And I just feel like again, I get it. People are paid propagandists in Western media, but to sit there and have him say that and not present any evidence, I don't understand how people can continue to watch corporate media and not see something wrong with that. That's very concerning, that the pushback isn't, well, you don't have evidence for that, so we're not going to. But they're spreading the propaganda too. The idea is to get everybody to be on board with this war with Iran, not realizing the Iraq war wasn't that long ago.
Yes. Well, but it goes back to the mental condition of many, not all, but many Americans, the mental condition of believing they are inherently superior to everyone else on Earth. There is a racial component to this, so they already are predisposed to not like Iran, not want to see any of this from Iran's point of view. And then when they hear this, all it does is justify their bias, their prejudice, their racism, and so they willingly accept this nonsense. It is utter nonsense. How does a mature, grown adult listen to a claim like this and, like you say, immediately ask, what is the evidence? And then the next question, why would they even want to do this in the first place? It doesn't make any sense at all. But they want to justify the irrational mindset that they have been programmed with since birth. I mean, I grew up in the U.S. I was brainwashed. I joined the military. That's how brainwashed I was. But that is the reality. They are brainwashed, and that is how this propaganda works. It plays on this programming, and it's unfortunately doesn't take much to push everything downhill to get it going. For them, it's a downhill fight to convince them we have to go to war with Iran or China. Russia is a little more complicated because Russians, look like white people. So even though most racist, like the much more racist people actually running the collective West see Slavs as subhuman as well. So they're very hard people to please. But the average American, they don't really understand that. But that's the unfortunate part of this. It is a downhill battle for them.
Do you think that Iran at this point should not try to have negotiations with the United States moving forward? I saw a report that Steve Witkoff is trying to have this conversation again. I don't even know if I believe that report. They've been saying a lot of things. But do you think they're pursuing the right path by trying to have that discussion with the U.S. again?
Just like before, they knew negotiations were never done in good faith, but they have to continuously come to the negotiation table. It doesn't cost them anything when you really think about it. They're not giving anything up. They didn't give anything up to this point. The same goes for Russia. The same goes for China, even though the trade negotiations, China may force the U.S. to come to them rather than go to the U.S. But they have to. It's just something they have to do. They have to keep that possibility open. If there was any conceivable way to end this, they would try to. And again, it doesn't hurt. And I just want to remind people, even the U.S. war on Vietnam, the U.S. was clearly losing. The Vietnamese were clearly winning. They were going to win decisively. And yet they continued to go to the negotiation table. We have to remind ourselves that we're trying to build a completely different system to what exists currently. We do not want to just replace that system with the same system, but with just different people running it and benefiting from it. So I think this desire to negotiate, this desire to not stoop down to their level, and I want to remind people watching missiles bombard Israel, just remember how nauseating it was listening to Israelis cheer as Israeli bombs rained on the heads of Palestinians in Gaza. Don't be like that. Iran has the right to defend itself, and this is something they have to do. And I'm not saying they shouldn't, but you shouldn't take joy. You shouldn't stoop to their level and lose your humanity in the process of doing this.
That's a good point, Brian, because I think, there has been that question has come up. People are like, no, you shouldn't, celebrate it or whatever. And it can be easy to do so, I think, because of what we saw happen in Gaza for so long. Yes. But yeah, that's a really good point to bring up. Well, another question I have in particular, I'm just trying to figure out where this all will head, because here's my fear. Let's say, okay, Iran goes back to the negotiating table and they come to some agreement with Steve Witkoff, right? What's stopping Israel from bombing Iran again anyway?
Well, exactly. The U.S. is not negotiating in good faith. So the U.S. is not going to here's the thing. If the U.S. did not want Israel to attack, all they have to do is pull the plug on the billions and billions of dollars of money and funding literally every aspect of their military is comprised of. Everything, all of the missile defense systems they're using to shoot down Iranian missiles, that was all paid for and developed by the US. This is not some great achievement by brave little Israel. This was the US building a forward operating base in the Middle East with an Israeli flag stuck into it. So they have plausible deniability for all the horrible things it's been doing to its neighbors. So it's not as if the US is going to negotiate and come to a deal with Iran and then Israel's just going to attack Iran anyway. But they'll do that to make it look like, oh, we tried diplomacy. We have no control over Israel. And the Iranians, we made a deal with the Iranians and the Iranians broke it. President Trump has done that to Russia and China now. And they already have done it to Iran. So, of course, they're going to do it again and again. But Iran just has to keep that door open. They have to participate in it. It's something they have to do to convince the world they tried diplomacy also. They tried every option available before it resorted to wider war. And they did everything they were supposed to do and leave all of this on the US and its Israeli proxies where responsibility belongs.
There have also been reports coming out of Israel that Benjamin Netanyahu has been telling people they can't leave. Have you seen like those reports? Like he's telling Israelis they can't leave.
I've heard a lot of reports. People have to be very careful about these reports. It could be true. Maybe it's not. We have to really try to verify it. And if it is true, eventually it will come out and it will be verified. It's just like Ukrainians being pressed into conscription and gangs going around and literally clubbing people over the head and dragging them to the battlefield. Eventually, the Western media had to admit it because it was happening on such a large scale. And if the Israelis are doing this, it will come to light and we will know about it. But I just want to warn people, there's deliberate disinformation taking place on both sides. There's genuine confusion. There's mistakes. A lot of people are not sleeping. I know myself, I have hardly slept since all of this began. And so it all contributes to what they call a fog of war. And we have to be very careful about the information we're pulling out and how we're handling it.
Thank you so much for saying that, because some of the accounts on X are notorious for this, by the way. Like they'll say breaking news and they'll have like this, you know what I'm talking about? They'll have like this headline, but they don't give a source. Exactly. And some of these are claims that you absolutely have to provide a source, or what are you doing? But it's a warning sign of who to avoid if you're looking for reliable information. Yeah, and I just want to bring everybody back to this because I'm sorry, this video will never age for me. In my mind, I find that it will always be relevant. This is General Wesley Clark. I don't know if everybody saw this video, Brian. I'm sure you have. Yes. But he gave this warning on Democracy Now! So this is like, I think this is like maybe 2007. That's Amy Goodman right there from Democracy Now! And I just want to remind everybody what General Clark said about the 7 countries. So I want to play this here.
He said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. If you were Iran, you'd probably believe that you were mostly already at war with the United States anyway, since we've asserted that their government needs regime change. So, and we've asked Congress to appropriate $75 million to do it, and we are supporting terrorist groups, apparently, who are infiltrating and blowing up things inside Iran. And if we're not doing it, let's put it this way, we're probably cognizant of it and encouraging it. So it's not surprising that we're moving to a point of confrontation and crisis with Iran. He said, I just got this down.
So this point here, this is important for people to understand. General Clark, I don't know if General Clark's still alive today or not, but he made it very clear that this was already decided. To Brian's point, like when he says you can't vote your way out, it was already decided that Iran was going to be one of those countries. And you can already see some of the other countries that were mentioned, the US already intervened there. So this was always going to be the case for as long as I can remember. They've been saying this since I was a kid, that Iran was building a nuclear weapon. So it's not new news. The media may make it. The media has a tendency to make it seem like it's new, but it's not. They've been repeating the same thing over and over. What's your take there about what General Clark tried to warn people about? Who is running this ship? Because it's not the president's.
It's definitely not the president's. And one point I want to point out is they're obviously very far behind schedule. I mean, that is very obvious. And this is part of the problem. And this is why it's so dangerous, because there is a high degree of desperation involved in all of this. They see China's rise, they see Russia's reemergence, and they know they're running out of time. And the longer multipolarism thrives, the less likely it is the U.S. will be able to reassert primacy over the planet, which is their ultimate goal. A lot of people trying to look at the conflict with Iran as the U.S. doing the dirty work for Israel, even though the U.S. clearly had Israel take responsibility and the brunt of retaliation. If it was the other way around, it would have been the U.S. that would have done that. But yes, that has always been the plan. And the interests behind this are the same interests that have been driving empire forever. And today in the modern world, it is industry and financial institutions. The largest corporations in the collective West get all of their money together and they fund a huge network of policy think tanks. The Brookings Institution, the Rand Corporation, the Council on Foreign Relations, there's a huge number of them. And this is to create consensus, because there's a lot of people involved in these corporations, board of directors, shareholders. So they use the think tanks as a forum to create consensus. The policy papers reflect that consensus. A team of lawyers takes that policy paper, turns it into a bill or policy for Washington, and then it goes to Washington with teams of lobbyists who get people on both sides of the aisle to sign off on it, which is why no matter who you vote for, you're going to get that policy paper, because the same corporations funding these policy think tanks, writing these papers, are the same corporations that fund the campaigns of every candidate running for office, including Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. In some cases, it was literally the same corporation funding both candidates. And then President Trump, after winning the election, he was surrounded by these billionaires and representatives of these huge corporations, these corporate monopolies. That is the deep state. So he didn't fight the deep state. He works for the deep state. He was put into power by the deep state. So that is actually how it works. That is why nothing changes. These corporations have a monopoly. The West has monopolized power over the planet for generations, and they want to maintain it, and that is what they're fighting for. And this is what we're all fighting to displace and replace with a fairer system.
This is why I constantly say, guys, we have to build dual power, because
Yes.
this is the thing. Like, elections happen. You can participate or not participate, whatever you choose is best for you. But at the end of the day, if we're not building dual power systems on the ground, locally and within our communities, they'll just continue to run over us, regardless of if it's a Democrat or Republican. That's just the reality, the way that I see it. However, people are not so stupid, Brian, because this poll came out today from Mediaite. Whopping majority of Americans oppose U.S. military involvement in conflict between Israel and Iran. And the percentage here, I was actually really surprised by the percentage amount here. According to the results, just 16% back U.S. involvement, while 60% say the U.S. should not be involved. Another 24% said they are unsure. So there's some hope there, Brian. I am so happy to see that right at the beginning, and not like it's been a year and people are like, okay, no, yeah, I'm starting to change my opinion about this war. Right from the jump, 60% say they do not want America to participate in this war. How do you feel about that? Are you surprised, or?
It's hard to say. I think there has been a lot of progress in waking people up, and I think the alternative media has played a big role in that. And obviously it has been effective, because all of us, we've all been victims. We've been targeted by the establishment. because they are worried about the effect we may be having in waking people up. And speaking of dual power, people have to understand, you can't just go out and protest. You can't just go out and vote. Not to say that you shouldn't do these things, but you have to have a real plan, and you have to have a real alternative. Multipolarism is not Russia, China, Iran, all of these other BRICS nations just protesting the US and telling them to stop. No, they have created an entirely separate system that does not depend on the US and cannot be controlled by the US. And this is what they are using to maintain peace, stability, and prosperity in their respective societies. They have created alternatives to the monopolies that have controlled Western civilization for generations. And this is why the US is targeting companies like Huawei, because it is a direct threat to their established telecom monopolies. Chinese car companies, energy companies, alternative banking systems. This is why the US is attacking all of these things, because that is the solution. And so when you talk about people in their communities locally doing a very similar process, creating alternatives to all of these systems, these companies, these businesses controlled by these special interests, that is your own way to participate in this process of emerging multipolarism. Multipolarism isn't just for BRICS, it's for everybody, including Americans. They can participate and invest in it and join it. They can do that, and they don't have to leave the United States to do it. It's not going to happen overnight, and people might say, well, so what if I boycott PepsiCo and I don't eat Lay's potato chips or buy an Apple computer or phone? So what? It's just me. But that is how they have accumulated power. Individuals all together every day, every year, paying into their monopolies. That is how they've got this power. And by us withholding that and directing it elsewhere, that is how we systematically dismantle those monopolies. So it's very important for people to understand that and see it in the long term. It's not a Hollywood movie. We're not going to have instant gratification. The problem wasn't created overnight. We're not going to solve it overnight. But that is what we have to do. And that will help accelerate it too. The more people that get involved, the quicker multipolarism will accelerate. And so will the irreversible decline of American hegemony around the world.
Well said. Brian, thank you so much for your time. Where can people follow your work?
Just search The New Atlas on YouTube, and then in the video description of all of my videos are other places you can find and follow my work. I'm on Telegram, X, and Rumble in addition to YouTube. I want to thank you again for having me on, and I want to thank everyone who tuned in to listen.
Thank you.
Take care.
Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.